Welcome back to Get It Seen, the simplest way to accessible design, a 10-part series. We call it a podcast, but is it really? I don't know. It's a series where Piccia and I discuss accessibility and bring it to you. And we have some things in the works for after this 10-part series is done, but more about that a little bit later, maybe a few weeks. Maybe after WordCamp US, we'll bring that announcement back, Piccia. But my co-host, Piccia Neri, is here. And today we have a special guest, Clive Loseby, who is a TED speaker. That is on my bucket list, Clive, to be a TED speaker. So someday teach me your ways so that I can be as excited about things and speak. I can't even speak today. I'm in the presence of greatness, and here I am just like fawning all over. So anyway, Ted, it's wonderful to have you here to talk today. Our topic today is legislation, and you can't talk about legislation without talking about the things around legislation. So forgive us if everything doesn't sound legalese today, because there's a lot that goes into this. We promise we will try to keep it briefer than we normally do, because we have a tendency to just go on and on.
Always.
Always. It's put Piccia and me in a room together, Clive, and it's done. We're here for hours, but we promise we won't do that today. But Clive, so that people understand who you are, if they haven't heard about you, could you give us just a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thanks so much for having me here, Michelle. It's a real pleasure to be with you guys. So, yeah, I've been passionate about accessibility for nearly 2 decades now, and always will be. Very personal reasons for being involved in accessibility, as most people who work in accessibility do. They have either a personal connection or know somebody who has a personal connection to it. The personal connection means that although it's frustrating when people don't understand the message, I get it, because if you don't have a personal connection, you don't understand the relevance of accessibility, whether it's digital accessibility, physical accessibility. It all comes down to the same thing, whether there are things that are barriers to people with disabilities to be able to do something. So that's why my passion isn't just about digital accessibility. However, that happens to be where my expertise is, and that's something that I get very passionate about.
So, Clive, when I'm a disabled person in that I use mobility devices, and I often talk about the fact that if your website isn't accessible, it's very similar to me not being able to access a physical space because there's not a curb cut or because the doors don't have automatic openers for me. And I have to rely on other people to be able to help me to get through things, similar to how somebody might need somebody else to tell them what's on a website, for example, if it's not an accessible site.
Yeah, and the connection between the two is the same, because you're if you think of a website as a virtual building, and you understand that, you can't these days, and you haven't been able to for a while, just knock up a building. It's got to pass building regs before it gets signed off, before it's even allowed to be open to the public. In the States, in terms of physical accessibility, they're light years ahead of the rest of the world because of the ADA, which has been around came out of the Vietnam War, came out of the need for it. So the times that we visited the States, that you see things have been in place for so long that physical accessibility is just a given. Although, having said that, there are many ways in which it's not, as you know more than anybody else.
Absolutely.
But the principles are exactly the same. And then the difference is the enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a building doesn't get signed off until somebody has issued a certificate saying it meets these building regs. Mm-hmm. I use that as an analogy with websites, and the fact that although anybody can build a website and anybody can launch a website, to be compliant, to be accessible, and to be legally compliant, it also needs to be signed off. Mm-hmm. And we may talk about later what an accessibility statement is. It's it's like a digital building regs for a website.
Yeah. I was going to say, Piccia said to me before you joined us this morning, Clive, that for people to say that they're 80% compliant or somewhat compliant is like me being able to get in the front door, but then there's stairs to anything else. So
Yeah.
It's
really that compliant.
It's
80% you can get through a door, Michelle, but the rest 20% of the rest of you can't get in. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
At least 80% can get in.
Yeah, and that's why it's so meaningless, because you either are compliant, you're partially compliant, or you're not.
Right.
There are, as far as the WCAG guidelines go, and as far as accessibility goes in terms of legislation, which is what we're talking about today, it comes down to those three things. You are fully, partially, or non-compliant, meaning that your website is so bad that there's absolutely no way that anybody with any kind of disability would ever be able to get through the front door, through the homepage, if you like.
Yeah. Taylor Swift, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, is launching a new album, and the teaser up to that was a light red with sparkles on a light green with some kind of like mistiness over it.
Yeah.
And I actually tweeted about it this week. I was like, come on, Taylor. This is like terrible for people with any vision issues, especially red-green color blindness, right? And so even people with literally millions of dollars at their disposal find themselves with sites that are non-compliant. And I would assume somebody who's got a team who could build like that just ignored it, as opposed to trying to actually be accessible for people.
So the green-red combo, even if you're not colorblind, which I am not, it vibrates for me because it's complementary colors. Basically, it's like green and orange, and it's complementary colors. So they literally pulsate for me. I can't look at it. And I read today, so Kay Moores, who you may know, Clive, she's very active in the UK community. She has an accessible marketing company, digital marketing company, and she was saying today that they basically they did a survey. I'm going to ask her if that survey is available, because they ran a survey asking whether any of the respondents had abandoned the website because they couldn't use it, such as, would be the Taylor Swift website. I can't use it. And 95% of the respondents said yes. So I don't know who the respondents were, but 95%. These are, important statistics that people with any kind of e-commerce should think about. But I can tell that's a rabbit hole that we're going to go down. So maybe I'm going to steer myself back to legislation, which is what we were going to talk about today, and all the corollaries to it. So you mentioned the idea. Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that the ADA is very interesting because the ADA wasn't born as you were saying, Clive, it wasn't born as a digital legislation. It's a legislation that's been extended to include digital, if I'm not wrong, but it wasn't meant about that, was it, Michelle? Because it's more like
it was in the 70s before there really was internet, and it was really for physical accessibility, mostly as Clive said, for the returning soldiers who had now physical issues where they had maybe missing limbs and were in wheelchairs, and so for them to be able to have accessibility to physical spaces. I do just want to caveat before we get into legislation that legislation looks different all over the world. So in the EU, legislation is years ahead of what it is here in the United States for digital accessibility. And here in the United States, it can still differ. It does still differ state by state. And so some states have higher levels of requirements for accessibility online than others do. And so I just want to caveat that at the beginning, that when we talk about legislation, we're probably going to focus on the EU, where it actually is, where something went into force this year. Laws have become enforced this year, whereas in the United States, we don't have that yet on a national level. So I just wanted to put that out there before we actually kind of dig into the weeds.
But what you do have in the States is the Section 508, I believe, which applies
Yes.
to the public sector, and the guidelines, which is what everything comes down to, whether it's the States, whether it's the UK, whether it's Europe or anywhere, pretty much any other developed country, all come back to these guidelines. WCAG 2.2 AA is where the digital world is at. As far as the legislation goes, it's 2.1, but that's purely because the legislation came out before 2.2 came into being, and 2.2 only came out a couple of years ago. So you're going to see 2.2 applied as an upgrade or as an enhancement or as a revision to the legislation. It's not a case of if, it's just a case of when. So the view that I always take is, because 2.2 brings in more things, it's not like it gets rid of things necessarily, it just extends it further. So I always take the view that if you're going to look at anything, look at 2.2, because 2.2 is where the world will be for a considerable number of years. 3 is in development, but that's apparently a completely different thing altogether, and that's years away. So I would say for this period of, I would say even to go as far as say 5 years, which is probably about as long as it will take for the European Accessibility Act to begin to initiate the global change of the same global change that GDPR did with their data protection, which came out, took 6 years. It took, but by that point, every country in the world had some kind of very similar data protection legislation. That was very simply because the GDPR guidelines or the GDPR legislation applied not just within the EU, but with anybody who had a window, if you like, into the EU. That's why you saw fines being levied on Facebook, 150 million about the way they treated their data, and euros, and 50 million on Google. But the numbers were staggering.
Yes.
When that happened, people did one of two things. They go, well, we're small fry, so we're way down the list. Or they go, well, this is real. What people have been saying is right. We need to do something about it. And then as every country then joined the bandwagon and adopted those same data protections or similar, because everybody's slightly different, but the same principles were adopted in the way that you've got to treat people's data with respect, you've got to be transparent, all the rest of it, that filtered through. So you have now, as far as data protection goes, a fairly level playing field. You've still got people who don't have don't have any cookie messages on them, or have outdated cookie messages, or have cookie banners, which I have a real issue with. Cookie banners came out because there was a tweak in the legislation, and now you had to have you actually had to give people give consent for the data to be shared rather than assume consent. Just on a slight tangent like that, because I have a real problem about that. I always have had. And I don't mind saying right here, right now, that none of my clients' websites and my websites have any cookie banners on them. Because by having a cookie banner, you're putting up a barrier. Most cookie banners are inaccessible. Therefore, you have a choice. Do you want to comply with GDPR, or do you want to comply with the Equality Act, which is what we have in the UK? For me, it's a straight choice. And I make the choice that if I'm going to comply with one of those two, as an accessible web design business and passionate advocate for website accessibility of all kinds, I'm always going to go that way, because that is and as it. I mean, the thing is, getting slightly off on a tangent, but I got so incensed about the whole cookie thing. I got a petition going in Parliament to try to get the law changed, and all I was trying to do was get it to go back to how it was. That's all. I wasn't asking. I was asking for a line to be changed so that we would go back to the idea of implied consent and having a cookie banner, a link to your cookie policy on your privacy notice on every page, so it was clearly there. But you had to you know, for me that was an obvious thing, but there was no interest in it, and I probably wasted months trying to get that one off the ground.
So
anyway,
David says he's struggling
Michelle,
with his cookie banner also. But let me bring up what
absolutely.
so Piccia has. Go ahead and explain what's on the screen.
Yeah, I'd prepare this page because there are a few resources about different legislations. And this is a page from Level Access, which is an accessibility company, on the Australian, I think it's Australian Digital Act. Anyway, it's the Australian legislation. And no, actually ADA, sorry. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you look at this page, it's got a cookie banner on it and a chat bot. And it just looks like the most inaccessible page that you've ever seen, as it's talking about accessibility.
ADA compliance.
And there are so many pages like this. And I agree. And also the cookie banners thing, it's the death of UX. You know, forget about it. It's just even as a UX person. But anyway, that's a tangent it's another tangent. It's another rabbit hole, but yeah.
Well, actually, just to close off that rabbit hole, it's all going to become meaningless anyway, because Google has changed its policy with tracking data on mobiles. It's got a different way of tracking data that I don't know the technicalities of it. So all I know is that they work on collecting the data on an anonymized basis that looks at more like group behavior. I don't quite know what it means, but what it basically means, it's their way of being able to track data, but more in terms of general data flow and not tracking individual data, which removes the need for a cookie banner, because you're not tracking their data individually. You're doing it in
exactly.
And that's what they've already done, or the last year, I think it was. Which will then just roll, because if Google rolled this, then everyone's going to roll it out. So you're eventually, I would say within 5 years, people will say, "Oh, do you remember those stupid cookie banners that people were an absolute pain?" And they're down in the history of the internet as the worst thing that's put accessibility back 20 years more than anything else. And that came out of the good intentions about looking after people's data, but as with so much legislation, it was badly thought through. And I was furious with the EU for doing it. I was furious with the UK government for adopting it, and everybody else. However, they're putting it right, because the EU have actually put the European Accessibility Act is now applies to everybody who has a window into Europe. And so for me, that's more than penance, because what they are doing now is actually going to see the same global change that GDPR did. It's not if, it's when. But it might be a while, but it's absolutely unstoppable.
We have a comment from Andrew Palmer. The problem is with chat boxes, they're generally a third-party connection, harder to load after the cookie banner.
Fair play. Although I have to say, I've dismissed chatbots for a very long time, and then somebody told me about a company called Olark, and they are worth checking out because they do an accessible chatbot.
Oh, that's interesting.
And if you go to my website, the chatbot that's on my website is using Olark's chatbot. So actually, big up to them for what they're because the thing is, and this is why I get so passionate about it, there's usually a way that you can make things accessible. My company's always been called Access by Design for the simple reason that when we started in 2006 or whenever it was, the only accessible websites just looked awful. They just looked nasty. There's no other way to describe them. And we wanted to show that actually you can do access and you can have strong design. You've just got to do it in a certain way. And these guidelines have been here since 1999. And there is no secret. But as I said at the beginning, personal reasons for being involved, very personal reasons for being involved within accessibility. If the accident we were all passengers in hadn't have happened, then we would give accessibility no more than, oh yeah, it's an important thing, but no more than that.
Yeah.
It's only when you have that lived experience, Michelle, in the same way physical lived experience makes you very aware of it. And the physical experience that we had and encountered was what started the whole accessibility awareness. That's why, even though the legislation has been there since 1999, I don't get stressed about it when people don't get it, because I wouldn't have got it either.
Yeah. What's a bit annoying is when you actually point it out. I mean, a lot of people do get it when you point it out to them, because everyone knows someone that has a form of disability. And actually, in my opinion, everybody is potentially disabled. I mean, we are, only... And or during the course of the day, we find ourselves in temporary disabilities, situational disabilities all the time. So this is when people need to understand what I brought up here, because one thing to say about the European. So this is a guide of mine that's super simple. It's really to the essentials, and it's done because I needed to understand it, because I did a talk about it at a conference in Berlin last year. So I needed to understand it, and so it's a very simple guide, and I'm gonna paste it into the YouTube chat. But another fabulous guide is by Equalize Digital, who we know very well because they have a great plugin for WordPress, and it's a really, really, really good guide about the AA, because it goes into detail. Look how long this is, but it goes into detail into the requirements by country, and that's something I haven't seen elsewhere. And one thing that I want to say is that about legislation in general, and Clive, I think you can back me up on this. The point is that the consequences of not complying differ in every country, but being compliant, being accessible, it doesn't have to do with the legislation. Am I making myself clear? So, it could be that, in Cyprus, you get different fines from Estonia, but what doesn't change is how you get your website to be inclusive and accessible to everyone. That doesn't change anywhere in the world.
No, and in the same way that GDPR was an EU-driven legislation, the fines and enforcement was on a country basis, mostly from Ireland. But the reality is that's a really interesting article. I have to check that out, because the EU said these are the parameters, but it's up to individual countries how they enforce it. But the thing is, I had somebody recently, global company, SaaS product, users all over the world, loads of them in Europe. And they wanted to, we got to chat about, getting their product to be made accessible, because it's not about not being compliant. It's about showing that you're aware that you're not compliant and that you're on the journey, and you're explaining why you're not compliant, and you lay it out in a very honest way that reaches out to people, that explains to people. And my TED talk was very non-techy, because it was just getting people over that initial hurdle about what an accessible website actually meant. But the point is that if you get people started on that journey, that's what people are going to be looking for. And actually, it's going to be very simple in one sense for somebody who from within any EU country who's looking for examples of bad practice or websites are not accessible, that they don't need to be a web expert to have two things that they can look for instantly. Number one, is there an accessibility statement? Yes or no? If there is no accessibility statement, then there's clearly no thought to be given that accessibility. That's a massive red flag. Number two, is the accessibility statement a compliant one? And again, there is a format. It may vary slightly from country to country, but the basic principles you can tell whether an accessibility statement is a compliant one or not if you spend any time in accessibility. So that would be the second check. I've seen websites that have a paragraph and it doesn't mean anything. It sounds clever, it sounds compliant, but it's not. You can drive a bus through it. You can drive a bus through any statement that doesn't meet the basic criteria that's outlined. There's no secret with any of these things. And there's
So,
go on.
sorry, I have a question. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But
No?
yesterday I was chatting to a friend who used to work for a private financial institution, actually an actual bank. It's a private bank, but it's a bank. And he was like, yeah, they're dealing with accessibility. Look, they have an accessibility statement. And he sent me to this page, and there was the page was inaccessible for what I mean, it had lots of issues, but there was a link to the statement, and I clicked on the link, and it was a PDF without any notice that it was a PDF. So they had their accessibility statement as a link to the PDF, and I was like, this is so it's for those who don't know, linking to a PDF directly without saying this is a PDF download is one of the you shouldn't be doing that, should you? And plus it's a PDF, which inherently, I mean, you can make a PDF accessible, but inherently a PDF is the most inaccessible type of document that was ever created, because also it's never responsive. Even when you make it accessible, it's not responsive, and something that can't be visualized correctly on mobile isn't really in its essence accessible. Would you agree, Clive? So I was like, okay, great.
I would, yeah, I mean, PDFs is such a massive issue. You know, we've got 95% of the top million websites failing the basics. We've probably got 99.9% of 999% of PDFs failing the basics. But that is a completely different issue. The only thing that goes as far as saying that is that people think that they can just knock up a PDF and it'll somehow become magically accessible, just in the same way you can build a website that's magically accessible. No, if you publish a document in any kind of, you know, Illustrator or Photoshop or not Illustrator, InDesign, even PowerPoint, although they have accessibility, some of them have accessibility features, quite often there is remediation required afterwards, and you can't remediate a document till you're given it. So in other words, the PDF itself, when it's generated, usually will require a lot of work. So a simple example, if you put something together like a brochure in Illustrator, and you put all your beautiful layouts and your graphics and your colors and everything all laid out just over the pages. When a PDF is published, the reading order will actually be the order in which the elements were uploaded or moved about. And the difficulty with that, of course, is that the screen reader is literally just jumping all over the place, even though it looks to be it's a thing called a logical reading order. And just because it visually there is a clear reading order, if somebody's using a screen reader, and the thing is, the software is out there, you can test all of this. It will show you what this looks like on a screen reader. It's absolutely all over the place, and that's why you will always need to have, for as long as you have PDFs, you will always need to have remediation. But on the other hand, it's when I talk to people about accessibility, and then we have a discussion about what an order to their websites involve, and I always drop that in because I want them to be aware of it. But you've always got a little bit of a hesitation because you think, well, I've shared a lot of information with you. I don't want you to overwhelm you and think, oh, blimey, all our PDFs are going to be. But that is a reality that we're all dealing with. It's, you know, you can't pretend that somehow this is not a major issue. And the fact that an accessibility, I would bet any amount of money that accessibility statement in itself wasn't accessible. I don't think it's a check. But the thing is that the fact that you're linking to it with no warning, with no, I mean, it's just
so wrong.
It's
so wrong. Yeah. So for everyone who's listening to us, if when you do your accessibility statement, please do not do it. Do not link to a PDF. Don't do it in the PDF format. And I think this accessibility statement thing is something that a lot of people really fail to grasp, because either they don't do it or they do it wrong. It's very easy to get it wrong. And it's something that is definitely one of the requirements in the European Accessibility Act. So if not in the ADA yet, because we don't have the digital bit, but definitely in the European Accessibility Act. So what would you recommend, Clive, to get an accessibility statement that is compliant, whether your company meets the requirements or not? Because for those who don't know, let's say it, because I don't want to give anything for granted, the exclusion rule is that if your company has fewer than 10 employees and less than 2 million yearly revenue, then you're considered a micro enterprise and you're excluded. But I don't care. I should have an accessibility statement. I don't have it at the moment. What should I do? How do we build an accessibility statement that makes sense? I'm not even going to say compliant, but I'm just going to say, how do we do one that is helpful and that makes sense?
Okay, so the two things there's two slightly separate things there. Just because the EAA may not initially apply to companies of certain sizes, it makes no difference to equality being sued privately under the Equality Act, whatever that may be. And in the States, you've got huge numbers of lawsuits. They're all private individual lawsuits against companies. There's lawsuits in France we read about on LinkedIn recently.
Yes.
Individuals going after company, or when I say going after them, the thing is, when you go that way, it's a longer process because people don't generally look to sue. Some do, but generally they can't use a website. They raise an issue. If they don't get a positive feedback, they'll say, well, please listen to me. And if they don't get any further feedback, they'll then go, well, I'm going to sue you. But people don't normally jump into that. Whereas the Accessibility Act, even the Accessibility Act, they're not going to say, right, okay, there's a ridiculous fine of X number of euros, not ridiculous fine, but there's a fine of 10,000 or 100,000 euros or €1,000,000, unless they've been given a chance to remediate or to do something about it. And that's why, in terms of the accessibility statement, it's better to have an accessibility statement than not having one at all. It's better to have a legally compliant accessibility statement. But if you just think of an accessibility statement, firstly being an apology for the fact that you're not accessible in whatever area. On my TED Talk, I use the analogy of a restaurant that's got upstairs seating. And the upstairs seating, there's no lift up there. So they say, look, we rent the building. It's not our building. Sorry, there's no upstairs seating that's accessible, but we've got this accessible area with raised tables with extra spaces for you to get wheelchairs on there. So you're kind of, if you think of that idea, that's what an accessibility statement is doing. It's saying, look, we fall short. Everybody falls short. I've only written 3 statements in the years I've been doing this that have all said this website complies with the WCAG 2. Whatever it is guidelines. But actually, most of the time you don't. That's okay. It's not a badge of shame to say you don't meet those standards. It's to say, here's why. Here's how we can help you in the meantime. And this is our roadmap for getting it sorted out. You see, if you do, then if you're a compliance officer or a compliance department and you're having to look at X number of websites, you're going to have a very simple criteria. No accessibility statement. Well, that's obvious, because you're not compliant because you haven't even got a statement. Number 2, it's clear that your accessibility statement is one of those ones where they would basically say, nothing to see here. This website's fully compliant, fully accessible. It's been tested with all these and blah, blah, blah. But clearly it's just it's a bluff. And that's just opening because it's literally a paragraph. Don't you dare come to us. Don't you dare come after us. And that's just an invitation.
Yeah. Clive, I heard the seagulls earlier. Maybe the seagulls are calling on the phone.
Clive
lives.
That's Bogner for you. Sorry, let's just put the phone to. So,
Clive lives.
I live in
by the
Bogner.
sea.
Beautiful. Well, I love it anyway. A lot of people. A beautiful town on the south coast of England. It's a seaside town, and I'm 2 minutes walk from the seafront. So yeah, you do get a lot of seagulls, and the thing about seagulls, they don't seem to understand the concept of nighttime. I actually always thought birds went to sleep at night, but the seagulls don't. 3 o'clock in the morning.
I want to share a tweet that I sent out earlier this year. I think you can see that now. This was me. My daughter was DJing at a location, so I went to hear my own child be able to DJ in this great this great LGBTQ plus event that she was doing with drag queens and everything. I was so excited to see her. And the curb cut had a giant cement pylon in front of it.
What?
And so
cement. That is cement.
What? Oh my, what?
Yeah, that thing probably weighed, I don't know, 1,000 pounds, if not more. It was absolutely immovable, except by some kind of machine or something. And I know, around the side of this sidewalk, the sidewalk was at a very steep, not steep, but at an angle enough that kids with skateboards would probably want to come in and go down on the sidewalks because it would be kind of a fun way to use their skateboards.
Yeah.
And so they even had the bumps, right? Like everything's there to like warn somebody that you're coming to the edge, that this is where the curb cut is, watch for traffic, like all of those things are there. And then to stop kids from using skateboards, they have now made an accessible design completely inaccessible by putting this giant concrete pylon in front of it. So in order for me to access a sidewalk, I had to go to the other end of this entire plaza, access it at the bottom of this rampy kind of area, and then come back up and around because it was not accessible where I should have been able to access it. And I thought,
you know what?
This is the PDF
Sorry,
you were talking about. This is the PDF on your website.
That's so. I really can't stand how they're set out to prevent fun being had, on top of them making it inaccessible to people like you. And this decision, because I am a skater, I'm an inline skater, I'm not a skateboarder, but we share the same spaces. And what I find myself like going, why are you depriving me of this? This city should be my enjoy I can't find a word. Anyway, whatever. Why are you doing this? Why? What's it to you? And what they do also, sometimes they put other things that to stop people with wheels, like the horizontal lines on the pavement, for instance. And those must be terrible for anyone using a wheelchair or mobility. But if you are actually a skater, I nearly killed myself once because you don't see them. There's no contrast. And these are like recessed alternate they're like ridges that they put on the floor as skate stoppers, and I nearly really hurt myself once. So I don't understand this.
So I've scrolled down. I tagged the city
on a slight rant, but
absolutely. So I tagged the city of Rochester where this was. They never responded, of course. Our friend Alex Stein, who is a blind man, commented, and the only reason he could comment was because I put really good alt text on the image on Twitter, which for people like Alex, right? And he said he once hit his knee on one of the concrete flower pots near a truncated dome at a crossing. This type of inaccessible nonsense has to stop. It's negative for all involved. Cities must take action, whether it's public right of way or not. And other people, of course, shared their thoughts as well, all in agreement with me. Of course, nobody said, "Oh, no, it's not a problem."
It just highlights probably the major issue is the lack of awareness. But you add to that, as far as corporates are concerned, is that they immediately think, well, do we have to be, what's the risk? What's the chances of us getting prosecuted? What's the how are we going to be affected? Is it likely you take if you want to take a really cynical view and say, well, the cost of the website, of fixing the website might be 50,000. Well, how much is the likely fine going to be?
Right.
And you could say, well, actually, or maybe I think, well, actually, look, let's swallow if it's less, we'll swallow the fine.
Yeah.
And that's the short-term view they take, because they're literally looking at profit numbers. They're not looking at things like reputational damage.
How often will they get fined, though? Are you fined one and done? You don't have to remediate, and you can't be fined again? Or is there like a 12-month period or a 2-year period, and then it's like, well, nope, here's your next fine?
The way that it generally goes, and I say I'm not a lawyer and I don't know every legislation, but the way it generally goes is that you're in the UK, where the public sector do fall under legislation, and they basically are told, here are the issues we've done spot checking your website. We found these basic issues. You need to get an audit. You need to get it sorted. Here is the date by which we expect to hear from you. And there was an educational establishment who contacted me. They'd had one of those letters, one of those emails, and it had gone into a general inbox and nobody replied. And they sent another one a month later saying, these issues are here, you haven't replied. Nobody saw that either. The third one was an email addressed to the principal from the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is a UK thing, naming the principal, saying, we're now taking you to court personally because you have failed to answer these issues. So there is, and obviously by that time, and when they reached out to me, I said, so, and they'd had 2 weeks to come back to them. And I said, and when they rang me, I said, so you've got 2 weeks to get this sorted out. And he said, no, that was a week ago. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That doesn't happen very often. But the point is, there is always a process. You don't, when this starts, whether it's the EAA or any other legislative body, or even a court case, a private thing, it doesn't stop there. You get a date in which you have to respond. If you don't respond, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't get fined immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But you would get fined if you didn't demonstrate willing, or you might even get fined if it was effective. I don't know. The point is, though, you should view it as an unstoppable train that will keep on coming.
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than just saying, well, go on.
Sorry, there's one of the many good things that the European Accessibility Act does is that in a lot of countries, or I think it must be generic, I'm not sure, I need to check the letter, but it's not just sanctions, it's not just fines. You can be deprived of the right to sell or exercise in the EU for a year. So if you, for instance, are an airline that operates in the EU, such as Vueling, that got fined for 90,000 euros in Spain, because their website wasn't accessible, as is the case with most travel websites. I'm really curious to see what Ryanair do. But even if 90K is nothing for them, well, what happens if instead of 90K, the Ryanair or Vueling are told, you just can't, until you sort it out, you can't operate in the EU. They're grounded. Can you imagine? I mean, wouldn't it be great? No more, deranged hand parties on the anyway. That's one thing to say, and then the other thing to say is that I hear a lot of people say, really, I was chatting to a disabled testing company called Fable on the other day, and they were saying, one of their testers was saying, as was our friend Bud Krause here, was saying, oh yeah, well, I'd rather lead. I don't like to lead with fear. I'd rather lead with honey. But as you say, Clive, does it work? No, it doesn't. They don't care. Literally, the vast majority of companies will just say, well, it doesn't. They don't see the loss. They don't realize that they're actually losing money because they don't see it. It's not a number that you can necessarily prove how many people abandon, and they just think, oh, we'll swallow the fine. Who cares?
Just to say a point on that, because you mentioned it earlier as well, that you can tell from analytics, even if the IP address is anonymized, so you're not actually using it for any marketing purposes, you can see very clearly how long somebody's staying on your website and whether they're coming back.
But if you don't ask yourself why they're not staying or leaving, that's the point.
The problem is, though, you don't know whether they've left because they've come to you by mistake, or they've left because they can't use your website. You can't prove that, or I mean, you could long term, because you could say, well, actually, before we became accessible, this was our bounce rate, or this was, these were the number of people who were leaving within a very short space of time. That's now decreased. But you see, to do that, that takes quite a long form study. The problem is everybody wants a quick solution. That's why people go on the internet and they go, "Oh, blimey, we are." They're worried about being sued. So what they then do is they find one of these companies like Accessibility or Userway or anyone like that. These people who sell shoddy solutions that don't fix the problems. What they do, even the ones that might even appear to be keyboard accessible, in terms of the extra enhancements that they offer, in terms of changing the text size, of the color, whatever, and it doesn't actually make the website accessible. It doesn't actually fix the broken navigation. It doesn't fix the fact that you cannot literally get to parts of the website. These plugins do not make any difference to that. They offer a solution that is a bogus solution, but they sell it as something that will take all your problems away. Sometimes for and then a few hundred, sometimes for thousands. But the problem is it's not doing it. And when they turned around, I mean, the thing is, the EAA is going to see the end of these companies because they are part of the problem. And
we are way over time, so I'm going to interrupt and be that person. What last minute thoughts, Piccia? 1 or 2 sentences.
I've said this before, I'm repeating it. I don't just be inclusive, think about compliance, do an accessibility statement, but think about getting as many people through the door as you can, because it's the right thing to do. And even though, as I've just said, that most companies don't care, but we do. So that's what we say.
Absolutely. Clive, last minute thoughts.
I would just say make a start, because it's a journey. It is a journey that in all the time that I've been doing this, nobody has actually made that start and then gone, no, not for me. In 2 decades. They may be slow, they may be way back down there in terms of where they are on that journey, but not one person. I mean, people have said, we don't want to get on board, we don't want to make that start, and that's usually the legal people say, we'll take that chance. But actually, if you make a start, nobody's ever looked back, and they absolutely, when you get into it, they love it. Everyone loves it because they realize it, and the penny drops, and then they realize the difference they're making, and then suddenly you've got all the positives that you can say from a marketing point of view, from an inclusivity. It's so ironic, isn't it, that everybody talks about inclusivity and then need to be inclusive, and yet not realizing that if you're going to be inclusive, that includes disabled people as well.
I'm
going to
piggyback on that and say that as somebody who is a wheelchair user in public, that outside of my home, I should say, that I don't want to have to come in through the kitchen. I don't want to have to come in through the loading dock, but I would rather come in through the kitchen or the loading dock than not be able to come in at all. So start making those accessibility things so that you can at least, if you can't do everything overnight, nobody can do everything overnight. Start, because if you don't start, you never will. So at least start to make some traction, make things accessible for folks, so that they can participate. Being locked out, being the last pick to play kickball when you were a kid hurt. Then think about the fact that you're denying all these other people the opportunity to play the game as well. So, thank you, Piccia. my co-host with the most, of course, Clive. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. It's been a pleasure to learn from you and to get to meet you. So
I'm very grateful to have you on board. Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure for sure. Stick around after we end the stream just so that we can follow up with you real quick. And everybody else, next week, our topic is captions. And so start thinking about that. Peach is going to talk to us. I'm going to do a little research between now and then as well on captions and how we use captions in accessibility. Thanks. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.